Welcome friends to this week 11 of week 11 lectures of soil science and technology, and uh, the highlight of this week lectures will be some advanced technologies which we generally use nowadays for different soil applications, and we will be talking about GIS and then GPS, or in other words they are geographic information system or global positioning system. And then in the coming lectures we will be talking about geostatistics, which is a specialized branch of statistics, and then we will be talking about some advanced sensors like diffuse reflectance spectroscopy as well as portable X-ray fluorescence sensors. So, in this first lecture of week 11, we will be talking about two important terms. These are GIS and GPS, and nowadays there has been extensive use of these technologies for different soil applications, be it efficient management of soil resources or precision agriculture, and we will be talking in details about these terms, and then we will be talking about their their principles and different backgrounds. So, let us start today's lecture. So, GIS and GPS. So, in this lecture we will be covering these following concepts, like what is GIS and how it works, and then what is vector data and raster data, and then I will give you some examples of GIS, and then we will be talking about GPS and how it works. So, let us start with the GIS. The GIS is a short form of geographic information system. So, this geographic information system or GIS is basically a computer based system including software, then hardware, then people and geographic information. Obviously, it requires some softwares, specialized softwares, and there are some specialized softwares like ArcGIS, then QGIS, Saga GIS. So, there are a couple of specialized GIS software which people or scientists use these days extensively. So, it is a combination of software and then hardware dedicated computer system to produce these maps, and then obviously you require some user as well as some geographic information which is stored in the database. So, obviously GIS, what is the utility of a GIS? You can see a GIS can create, and then a GIS can create, then edit, then query and analyze and display map information on the computer. So, as you can see here in this picture, GIS basically composed of different data layers, and here you can see that there are three different data layers which are stacked over each other. Obviously, the first layer is the street data, followed by building data and vegetation data, and this street data is overlaid on some background and followed by building data and vegetation data. So, you see that while we stack all these three layers together, we are getting an integrated data and we are getting a real world representation where we get both street data, building, and street building as well as vegetation. So, basically GIS is a combination of different layers which are stacked over each other, and after stacking them each other we generalize any we generalize any real world feature. Not only that, at the same time we create, edit, query and analyze from those real world features or real world map also, apart from the traditional mapping. So, let us go ahead and see what GIS can do. Now, 80% of the local government activities estimated to be geographically based. For example, they do different types of zoning, then public work, public works like streets, water supply, sewer planning and all these things, then garbage collections, then land ownership and variation, and public safety, fire and police. So, all these things can be managed, all these things are basically geography based, and GIS is very helpful for properly managing these things which have some geographical connotation. Secondly, a significant portion of state government has a geographic component. For example, example, natural resource management or highways or transportation, you can use GIS. Then third one is the business and business use of GIS for every wide arrays of application. You can see different types of retail size selection, and then customer analysis, then logistics like vehicle tracking and routing, and then natural resource explorations for petroleum, etc. Then precision agriculture. Precision agriculture is highly related to the GIS and its applications, and then civil engineering and construction. So all these are related to different GIS applications. Then obviously for military applications also you need at GIS. Specifically battlefield management as well as satellite imagery representation. So all these are managed through GIS applications, and obviously some scientific research also employs GIS, starting from geography, geology, botany, then anthropology, sociology, economics, political science, epidemiology, criminology, and all these things. So you can see GIS has a wide GIS can be used in wide range of domains, and it is nowadays becoming a important tool in the hand of agriculture as well as national policy makers. So let us see what are the other important thing in GIS. Let us see some examples of applied GIS. You can see in this slide I have listed a couple of them. Obviously, this list is not exhaustive list. So you can see here for urban planning, management, and policy making, you can do zoning, subdivision planning, then land acquisition, then economic development, then code enforcement, and then housing renovation programs and emergency response, crime analysis, tax assessments. For environmental science, you can use monitoring environmental risk, then modeling stormwater runoff, then management of watershed, floodplains, wetland, forest, aquifers, then environmental impact analysis, hazardous or toxicity analysis, and toxic facility siting, then groundwater modeling and contamination tracking, and political science like redistricting, and then analyzing of election results, then predictive modeling. So these are some examples of GIS. Apart from that, in civil engineering, you can use locating underground facilities and then designing alignment for highway transit, and then coordination of infrastructural maintenance. In case of business, you can do some demographic analysis, market penetration share analysis, site selection you can do, then educational administration you can do, attendance area maintenance, and then enrollment projections, and sometime in advanced areas you can use GIS for school bus routing also. For real estate, obviously neighborhood land prices, then traffic impact analysis, and then determination of highest and best use, all these can be done through GIS. In case of healthcare, you can do epidemiological study, and then needs analysis and service inventory. So you can see a lot of things you can do using GIS. So now we know about the application of GIS. Let us move ahead and see how GIS works. Now this slide basically shows GIS data has a spatial or geographical references. So this might be a reference that describes the feature on earth using some a latitude and longitude, a natural coordinate system, an address, a district, a wetland identifier, a road name. So basically the essence is a GIS stores information about the world as a collection of thematic layers that can be linked together by geography. So you can see here in this table, we call it attribute table. So in this attribute table, it is basically linked with the actual map which is shown above this attribute table. Now this map or the study area is the map of the study area is divided into some numeric into some large number of polygons. As you can see, this is one polygon, this is one polygon. So this polygon basically represents some mapping unit or homogenized area based on certain characteristics. Not only we can map it, but also in the attribute table we can we can tag these individual polygons with some specific features, and we can actually populate or actually input their respective properties in the attribute table. Just like here you can see the polygon of class 3 basically represents a scrub with growth index of 17 and fire hazard of very high and soil type of clay. So, obviously this polygon which has been identified with some identifier can be grouped into can be characterized by these particular properties. So, if you want to know what is the particular property of that polygon, if you make a query, it will automatically extract this information from the attribute table and make the further analysis or give us the output. So, this is how these information in the attribute table is geographically related or tagged with any location. So, that is why not only we can see and analyze and query from map, but also we can extract whatever information we can whatever information we require by analyzing this database. So, that so now you probably have an idea about how this GIS thing works. So, in the GIS system architecture and components, you can see basically it starts with data input. So, we basically input the data which creates a geographic database. Once we create the geographic database, the next step is to input some query. For example, we want to answer certain questions, and I will show you one practical example later on. So, if we input our query, obviously it will it will be directed to the geographic database, and this geographic database will automatically do some transformation analysis, and based on this transformation analysis it will give us the output display and reporting. So, we can get directly report from the geographic database, or this geographic database can produce some geographic database can undergo some transformation and show us some analysis and do some analysis, and then further it produces the output. So, ultimately the output we are getting in terms of maps as well as in terms of some quantitative measures or different or specific queries. So, the GIS data model is basically can be shown as I have told you, it can be shown as a as a stacked feature, as a stacking of individual data layers. So, you can see these GIS data models can be produced as a stacking this GIS model can be produced as a result of stacking of these individual layers. Starting from digital orthophoto, we will be talking about digital orthophoto later, and then you can see about the streets, then hydrography, then parcel of lands, then buildings, then zoning, then utilities as well as administrative boundaries. So, all these layers are stacked over each other or laid over each other to produce this ultimate representation of earth features. So, data basically is organized by layers and coverages or themes. These are basically synonymous concept, these layers, coverages or themes, with each layer representing some common feature. For example, in the buildings, obviously this layer will be shown only the building, we will show only the buildings which is present at that particular place, and layers are integrated using explicit location on the earth surface. Thus, geographic location is the organized principle. So, these layers are basically will be stacked together based on some geographic connotation. So, that is why this geographic location is the organizing principle in case of GIS data models. So, let us see some examples. So, you can see here we have 3 layers or 3 themes. These are roads, and then hydrology or water, and then topography or land elevation. So, you can see here all of them are represented in terms of longitude and latitude. These are the roads, this is the hydrology, and this is the topographical features, that means the surface unevenness or or land elevation basically. So, they can be related because the precise geographic coordinates are recorded for each of the theme. So, you can see for each of these layers or or theme, basically we have got the precise geographic location or geographic coordinates or latitude longitude. So, basically we can be integrate these three layers together, and layers are comprised of two types of data. You can see here, one is called spatial data, which describes the location. So, basically you see GIS is basically geographic information system. So, the first objective of GIS to give us some spatial inference. That means we want to see what is the spatial variability, or in other words we want to see where the data exists or where a particular feature exists. So, these spatial data can help us to describe the location or where in terms of some geographic location. Secondly, attribute data, which is present in the attribute table, can specify what, how much and when. So, these all queries can be answered by using proper GIS analysis. So, you can see here roads are being tagged with the longitude and latitude, then hydrology can be tagged with longitude and latitude, then topography is again tagged with longitude and latitude, and layers may be represented in two ways. First of all, in vector format as points and lines, and secondly in raster format or image format as pixels. So, there are two types of features you will see in case of GIS. We will be talking about this later on. One is called the vector format, which is basically represented by line, points and polygons, whereas another type feature of GIS is basically in the raster format, and this raster is basically represented by a grid of cells, and we will be talking about that in a few minutes. So, all geographic data has four properties, for example, projection, scale, accuracy and resolution. We will be talking about those terms later on. So, let us go ahead and see what is the what are the other features. For example, here you can see spatial data basically shows you, or spatial data gives you the information of where a particular a particular feature is located, or in other words it gives us the spatial or specific location, or remember that this spatial data is basically located or stored in terms of a specific file feature, file type, we call it shapefile, and the shapefile or geodatabase or similar geographic file. We'll be seeing the shapefile in a shortly. I will show you some shapefile, and remember that another type of data, as we have talked about, is attribute or descriptive data, which basically gives you the information about what, how much and when, and these specifics, these specifies characteristics at that location, natural or human created, and stored in a database table, just like in and this database table is called the attribute table. So, this descriptive data is basically stored in attribute table, and we have to input this data basically from different sources, and these attribute data in the attribute table basically helps us to answer this question, what, how much and when. So, GIS system traditionally maintain spatial and attribute data separately. So, in a GIS software it can be maintained separately, both in a spatial file or shapefile, another in attribute data, and the GIS software has the capability to join them for display or analysis. So, this is the beauty of GIS software. It is not the simple mapping, it is not the simply database management. It is a combination of both of them to create an interactive solution for each and every problem which is related to geography. So, for example, in ArcView, which is a software, the attributes of a table, attributes of a specific thing in a table is used to link a shapefile, that is a spatial structure, with a database table containing attribute information, or in order to display the attribute data spatially on a map. So, you can see this is a shapefile. The shapefile format is a popular geospatial vector data format for geographic information system software. And the type of you can see these are the political boundaries of India, and this can be called this can be considered as a shapefile. Remember that the shapefile can be represented by either points, polygons and or lines. We will see that later on. So, the two fundamental feature of data models we will see, there are two types, one is called vector data, another is raster data. So, in vector is basically a series of x and y coordinates, and we basically used for representing discrete data, like for discrete data representing as points, lines and polygons. And as I have told you, the raster is basically represented by grids and cells, and it basically shows the continuous data such as elevation, slope and surface. So, raster data described by cell grid one value per cell. So, you can see it shows the clear differences between these two data type. This is the vector data which is shown by points, and this is by line and then polygon, and you can basically describe any vector data by using these different features, and raster data is basically denoted by either these cells or zone of cells, or these grids of cells. So, this slide shows vector and raster representation of the spatial fields. As you can see here, vector data is again can be represented in terms of some polygons, whereas raster data can be represented in terms of some some gridded cells. Okay, remember that the raster data is raster data basically represents some continuous data fields like elevation, and for example, the image is basically a rasterized format. Any image is basically can be converted, is basically a raster data format, where each individual pixel represent a grid, or a grid in that raster data. So, let us see the data representation in a GIS. Obviously, remember that in the real world, anything or any feature can be represented by a combination of a raster and vector data, and so let us see how it go, how it happens. So, you see it is a gridded cell basically, these are number of rows, as you can see, and also the number of columns, and these are basically contains some cell where there is no data, and cell size are almost similar. So, you can see points data, which is a kind of vector feature. You can assign these points as grids just like this, and also polygons as a zone of cells just like this, and also line as a sequence of cells like this, or sequence of grids like this. So, you can see you can literally represent your vector data in terms of your point raster data by using either specific grids or a zone of cells or line as a sequence of cells. So, this is how you can represent any feature of the earth surface in terms of both vector data as well as raster data. So, this is again note, you can see here is the gridded cell. The polygon cells are represented by this green field grids, whereas this no data or the cells which does not contain any data is basically represented by these black cells. So, again this is a cell network which is basically line as a sequence, and as you can see these are some examples to show how these vector data and raster data can represent any feature over the earth's surface. So, let us see some good examples. You can see this these some images, or we call it dumb rasters. Why we call it dumb rasters? Although they look very good, however, they does not produce any good quantitative or any good information about about some specific features. If we ask the question like how, where, if we ask the question how, when, how, and all these things, all these cannot be answered by just interpreting these images. So, this is called dumb rasters, and as you can, these are the smart raster, obviously because all these are represented by some specific attributes. For example, it is a smart raster of 5 feet grid, and you can see the values are given and counts are given, and also some features are given for each of the cell. So, whenever any images is associated with a attribute table, we call it a smart display of data. So, some important terms before we see some examples of GIS. First of all is projection. Projection is a method by which the curved 3D surface of the earth is represented by x and y coordinates on 2D flat map or screen. And remember that although we are we are trying to represent any 3D surface in terms of 2D flat map of screen, there has to be some distortion, and so the distortion is inevitable. Second is the scale. So, there is a ratio of a distance on a map to the equivalent distance on the ground, and in theory GIS is scale independent, but in practice there is an implicit range of scales for data output in any project. So, if you see any GIS map, it always will associate with some scale. Thirdly, accuracy, how well does the database info matches with the real world. So, it can be measured into three aspects. First of all, positional accuracy. So, that means how close the features to their real world location. Secondly is the consistency. So, do feature characterization in database match those in the real world. So, the second consistency, so the second is consistency based accuracy. So, is a road in the database a road in the real world. So, that type of validation can be done by consistency based accuracy measurement. Thirdly is completeness, which is are all real world instances of feature present in the database. So, or in other words, are all routes are included. So, these type of answers you can see while you are doing this accuracy analysis. And also resolution. Resolution basically shows the size of the smallest feature which is able to be recognized. So, for raster data it is the pixel size. Obviously, as the size of the pixel goes down, the resolution is increases. Similarly, just like in case of in any photograph, as the resolution increases, the size of the pixel size goes down, or in other words, as the size of the pixel size goes down, the smallest feature can be identified through these individual pixels. So, guys, so I hope that you have gathered some knowledge about these important terms, and you can see here, let us see one example of GIS. Here you can see this this basically shows a raster image layer, which is the digital orthophoto photograph layer, and digital orthophoto is basically combines the visual properties of a photograph with the positional accuracy of a map in computer readable format. So, this is our base map, and then people have used there are two types of vector layer. This is the vector layer of street network, and this is another vector layer showing the land parcel layers. So, it is represented by lines, however, this land parcel vector layer is represented by polygons. So, let us see how these three can be integrated to produce the answer of a specific query. So, in this picture you can see these three layers, basically two vector layers and one raster layer are overlaid based on the common geographic location. So, they have similar geographic location. So, they are overlaid to each other, and ultimately you can see after we put some query. So, our query is to identify the parcel which within a half mile buffer of the Park and Central. So, if it is the Park and Central and we are overlaying all these three layers to each other, we are stacking all these three layers to each other, obviously then you can identify the areas which are identify the areas which are containing the parcel a half mile buffer of Park and Central. So, you can see by using this is the actual use of GIS, and by using this GIS we can query, in our case the query was to identify the specific locations which are within half mile buffer of Park and Central, and you can see by overlaying all these layers together we can identify those areas. So, I hope guys now you are getting some ideas about these GIS, and obviously there a plenty of research is going on the GIS applications in soil science. Obviously we can use the GIS for identification of a different field location. Not only that, we can also do some geostatistical mapping using GIS softwares. We will see that later on. And so all these better resource management to identify the earth surface features are efficiently managed by these geographic information system. So guys, let us stop here, and in the next lecture we will be starting from GPS, and then we'll see that how this GPS is helping us for identification, or for positional identification, and how we are using this GPS nowadays, and so on and so forth. So guys, thank you. Let us meet in the next lecture of week 11. Thank you.